Heyo and welcome to Selling Made Simple. My name is Will and in this video I'm going to explain a simple step-by-step process that's going to allow you to beat any sales objection. But why is this important? Well, if you don't know how to beat sales objections, you can have lots of conversations with lots of prospects who might actually buy from you that end up with no deal being made. By beating sales objections, you're instantly, overnight, going to become more productive and way more successful in sales. Few things are more infuriating than having a product that you know is a perfect fit for your buyer, but then continually gets shot down time and time again. When buyers turn around and say, well, we just don't have the budget, or we're happy with the service that we already use, or perhaps they don't see the value in what you're pitching. These are called sales objections, and they are often the biggest hurdle to you closing the deal. But when addressed the right way that we're going to cover in this video, objections can help you build rapport, provide valuable buyer insights, and of course, lead to more deals getting done. In this video, we're going to cover the most effective step-by-step process that I know to deal with any sales objection. So let's get right into it. Now, getting a negative response from a prospect doesn't necessarily mean that your deal is dead in the water. Buyers are just people. And when people are unsure about making a change or buying a product, they tend to throw out willy-nilly excuses for not taking action. In the world of sales, we call these excuses sales objections. Now, some of the excuses that are given to sales reps come from legitimate places, and they are legitimate reasons for why a buyer can't sign off on a deal. Others are knee-jerk reactions, which we're going to cover later in the video. But no matter what excuse is being thrown at you, you can break them with this process, this framework. So this framework here consists of just a few steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a second pathway over here as well. You're going to listen to the issue that the buyer has, repeat it back to them, potentially solve it, confirm it's solved, or just frankly and very literally move straight past it. So let's go into each of these steps in a little bit more detail, starting with really listening to the issue that the buyer has. This is important because people like to be heard, and it's no different when you're overcoming sales objections as well. That's why the first step of this objection handling framework is to listen closely to the buyer as what they're describing their sales objection is. And most importantly, the most important thing you can do is just shut up. Don't interrupt the prospect when they're giving you an objection. Don't try and interrupt them with your answer. Don't try and outwit them or cut them off with a reason why their objection is actually garbage and they should buy from you anyway. Additionally, give a slight pause after they've posed their objection so they know it's actually sinking right into your brain box. And to put a little bit of data, some numbers on this point, sales intelligence platform Gong found that sales reps in the bottom 20% of performers spent 68% of their time speaking. However, the top closers spent 42% of their time talking. That's just one of the differences between a high performer and a low performer. High performers talk less. Step 2, we're going to repeat the objection back clearly to the prospect. So now that you've put effort into really genuinely listening to what the buyer is saying, it's time to move on to the next step of the objection handling process and to repeat it back to the buyer. And this could sound as simple as if the buyer says, hey, Will, I'm not sure if you can do it in the color I want. You can repeat back to the buyer, okay, I hear what you're saying. So we are unsure if we can provide the correct color. And sometimes the buyer is just going to turn around and say, yes, can you show me the colors that you offer? And we'll see if we've got this widget in a green. Do you see there how simple this was? How the buyer solved their own objection. By just listening and repeating the buyer's objection back to them, you're going to find a lot of sales objections just disappear in your conversations. And there's several reasons why this step in the objection handling framework is so essential. First off, it avoids any misunderstandings that you may have made during the listening process. It shows the buyer that you are listening proactively to them, which shows you care, that you're adding value to the conversation, that this is a real conversation, as opposed to just you trying to get your sales pitch and just shove it down the buyer's throat. And it's an effective way to deal with what we call knee-jerk sales objections. Now, the first 2 points I made there are pretty obvious. So let's take a closer look at this third point, the knee-jerk objection. And these come about, especially in the world of B2B sales, because buyers have dealt with so many salespeople over their careers that they've got a bunch of automatic responses that they throw at salespeople to get them out of their hair. And we need to break through this knee-jerk reaction mentality to break real objections with the buyer. We're going to do this with what we call a pattern interrupt as we repeat back the buyer's question. So let me give you a quick example of this. So perhaps the buyer says, hey, I don't have the budget for this project. Well, a pattern interrupt, repeat it back statement could be, so you've worked with us before then and you know our pricing? Here, the buyer is trying to use budget as an excuse. But unless you have explicitly told them your pricing, how do they know that you're out of budget? They don't. They've just thrown this random excuse at you and there's no logic behind it whatsoever. So in this example, we're doing two things that act as pattern interrupts. First off, we're avoiding using all of the phrases that salespeople typically use. We're not going to say, hey, we're just reaching out, or I'm checking in, or I just wanted to. We're not going to use any lines like that. Because if you use the same language as everybody else that are communicating with your buyers, all these other salespeople out there who are just spamming the people you're trying to get in front of, well, you're going to be ignored, like all those suckers are getting ignored as well. Second, I'm also proactively saying the opposite of what most other people say. For example, if a buyer gives you the objection, just mail me the details. Well, most salespeople are weak. They're just soft. They don't want any confrontation. And so they're just going to email over the details. Instead, I'm going to say something different. I'm going to do the opposite of that. I'm going to end the conversation by going, sure, what details do you want me to send? Because the prospect's expecting you to do all the work here. You put a little bit of pressure on them to do the work and they go, I don't really know. Tell me more about your product and I can tell you more about the details that I want to receive. Pattern interrupts like this snap buyers out of those automatic responses and it makes them more receptive to the rest of what you've got to say because they encourage your buyer to actually listen to what you're saying and not just dismiss you as another pesky salesperson. So after we've listened to the issue, we've repeated it back potentially with a pattern interrupt injected in there as well, we're going to now solve the issue if that's what's needed. Because listening and repeating back sales objections to the buyer, you've hopefully now clarified what the actual problem is and whether this is a knee-jerk objection or not. And there's no magic here. People don't buy when they have genuine concerns, and they sure as hell don't buy with these concerns go unaddressed, especially if this happened objection after objection after objection. And it turns out if the issue is a true one, is a real objection, then it's up to you to now solve it. If it's an issue of price, start talking about numbers. If it's your product's functionality, well, maybe share some of the core features and the problems that you solve. If it's implementation, talk about your extensive onboarding program. Whatever it is, solve the issue for the buyer. And then the final step here, we're going to confirm that the issue has been solved. And this is a short but entirely necessary extra step here that salespeople often forget about. Because once you've addressed the issue, it's up to you to confirm that it's satisfied the buyer's concerns. This means confirming that your prospect heard your answer, understood your answer, and accepted your answer. Just because you say something to the buyer doesn't mean that they have comprehended it and they accept that their issue has been resolved. Ask the buyer overtly if you've solved their problem and make them go, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Try and make them say it out loud the best you can. Otherwise, the buyer's brain just might not register that the objection has been solved. And if you don't complete this step, if you go through all this process and don't complete this step, the buyer is likely to bring up this objection over and over again in different forms throughout the remainder of the sales process. It's going to drive you mad because you think you've already solved this and you're not going to get the deal done. And you don't have to be aggressive at this step of the process. Just ask, hey, did this answer your concern? Billy, Bob, Joanne, whoever you're dealing with. Now, there is a shortcut here, and you can't use this every time that you get faced with an objection in B2B sales, but you can go down this route every now and again. This is called the moving past the issue step. So if after repeating the issue to the buyer admits that, well, the sales objection that they raised wasn't all that important, it's time to move straight past the issue. And to be honest, not all issues are worth debating with a buyer. If you're confronted with a knee-jerk problem that's not all that important or all that relevant, you can often move straight past these issues during your objection handling process as well. And now, I know this sounds and feels a little bit sneaky the first time that you do it, but let me tell you this, the buyer has thrown out this sales objection unconsciously. They probably barely know the excuse they give you in the first place. If you repeat back the objection to them and they look at you blankly or they don't give you an immediate response, just say, hey, okay, that makes sense. Let's come back to that in a minute. Okay, we get into this. We do this 1, 2, 3, X, Y, Z. Carry on the sales conversation, carry on the sales process. And unless the buyer proactively brings you back to the sales objection later on in the sales process, you're probably never likely to hear it again. You're going to find that once you learn to recognize these flippant objections, maybe 50, 60% of the objections that you face day to day can be skipped over just like this. You can move straight past it. Okay, so there you go. A simple step-by-step process to deal with sales objections. If you enjoyed this video, why not make selling simple by watching the next video that's popped up somewhere on the screen right now.